We turn now to threats to election security and efforts to combat false information online. We're joined by CBS News cybersecurity expert and analyst Krebs and Kara Swisher, tech journalist and host of the podcast On with Kara Swisher and Pivot. Good to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
We were just talking about this with Dr. Gottlieb. But on the election front, and Kara, I want to start with you. There have been these recent studies talking about Facebook, TikTok, approving even ads with political misinformation on them. How does this continue to happen with vaccines and with political misinformation? Why can't these platforms get control?
Because they don't want to make those decisions. They want to opt themselves out of decision-making on editorial. And you heard Nick Clegg, who's number 2 at Facebook right now, essentially, just gave an interview where he talked about that. We shouldn't be the arbiters of this. We shouldn't do this. It should be government. But then we have the First Amendment, so government can't intercede. So I think there's just so much of it, and it floods the zone so much, and they make money from it, that they don't want the responsibility for it, even though it's on their platforms, and they should have the responsibility.
And some of it sort of dances or flirts with distortions. And so you have to be in that government business of spotting this. But Chris, how do you even do that?
Well, it's a challenge, as Kara points out, with the First Amendment issues. DHS launched their Disinformation Governance Board earlier in the year, and that was not actually met with any kind of fanfare, and they ultimately stood it back down, even though efforts they were taking through that group have been underway for a decade or more within DHS. So one of the things that we looked at back in the 2020 election was not so much the specific claims or the specific elements of mis or disinformation, but it was more the thematics that were emerging. So not pinning it to a single individual, instead looking at, hey, these are some of the claims we were seeing, and here are the security controls or preventions in place that would actually not allow that to happen in an election. And we're seeing some continuation of that. But once again, there's so much of it, and once it hits, it's really hard to go bit by bit and pull it back.
I want to show our viewers some of the video that our CBS affiliate out in Arizona filmed multiple incidents of possible voter intimidation. They had armed individuals wearing tactical gear, as you can see there, camped out by a voter drop box. There were other 2 with handguns that were concealed yesterday. So some of this is driven towards a very specific conspiracy that emerged, right? So, Chris, how does the FBI head this off and not allow it to go into political violence?
Well, I think the important thing here is that if any voter or election official sees these sort of things happening in Arizona, they make a report. They tell the relevant officials, and they can investigate, and they can look at these people, they can investigate, and then there's a deterrent measure.
But it takes the guy with the tactical gear before that happens?
Well, and that's the biggest challenge here, as I see it, is that the continued efforts to delegitimize the 2020 election are resulting in candidates that are incentivized to push these lies, but also then you have a radicalization and activation across the voter base that are effectively, this is performative. This doesn't happen. The claims of mules and ballot trafficking, it doesn't happen, particularly in a way that someone like this would be able to detect anything. Moreover, what's happening is the people that are being accused of ballot trafficking or being a mule actually report it to the officials and say, here's my name, here's my contact information, I was accused of this. Would any legitimate fraudster or mule do that and then report that on themselves? Of course not. So it's all performative, and unfortunately, I am concerned that it results in violence.
Chaos is the point.
Yes.
Chaos and discord. It's actually from the Russian playbook.
Yeah.
Chaos is what they want. Discord, problems, making people radicalizing people, and it's in the mainstream. Before it was it bubbles up from the bottom, but now it's pushed down from the top. And so just last night you saw Trump say a number of things that were radicalizing. I don't know what else to say it. And so that goes down, and then it goes back up, and it's hit the mainstream now. They don't even need these ads or anything else, because it's now infected some of the public so much. And so this is where people get their news, a lot of news. And before this, we had sort of information obesity. Not enough people got good news. Now they get a lot of information, but not actual facts.
We're going to take a quick break and come back, talk more about this in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation now with Krebs and Kara Swisher. Kara, I want to pick up with you. we've been talking about social media. Twitter may find a new buyer, billionaire
Yes,
Elon
probably.
Musk.
Friday.
On Friday's a day,
Yeah,
I believe.
supposedly.
Senator Mark Warner, who chairs the Intel Committee, has said that there is no American more dependent upon the largesse of the Communist Party than Elon Musk. He's the CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, the rocket ships. Bloomberg saying that the administration is going to have to do national security reviews, potentially, of businesses he owns.
Sure.
So how much of a risk is it if this transaction goes through?
It depends on what they find, I guess. You know, I mean, I think the issue is he already does a lot of defense work, a lot with the rockets and everything else, and is considered very innovative and has done amazing things. The International Space Station depends on Elon Musk and his rockets. And so he does a lot of, you know, obviously with transportation, that's another area that's important to look at, and who owns it. And Twitter also, this is a big communications platform, even though it's a terrible business. So who owns it matters. And so who are his investors, who is putting money into it, et cetera, should be looked at. It's as a matter of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost kind of amazing, Chris, that there isn't more scrutiny. I mean, there is FCC scrutiny of ownership of news organizations. Right. When it comes to social media and a company like TikTok, it's owned by a Chinese firm. An increasing number of Americans are relying on it for actual news, not just tweeting about themselves, but actual news. Is this a risk?
Well, I think just to your point, as more people use these platforms, as they get more information, as they're shifting away from traditional media that we're all used to, the intelligence services of our adversary are seeing this shift as well. And so it's not necessarily specifically about TikTok. It's all platforms and it's all avenues. But TikTok represents a specific risk. And a colleague of mine wrote a paper, Dakota Carey wrote a paper for Cyberscoop, talking about how it's not necessarily the data security challenges. It's that the Chinese Communist Party may have the ability through the parent company of TikTok to actually shape narratives, suppress, lift, shape what we see on a daily basis. And it doesn't have to be everything you see all the time. Mm-hmm. It can just be enough. Yeah. It can just be enough, a little bit. And I think about what happens if the Chinese invade Taiwan. What happens in the run-up to the 24 election if they're not happy with some of the more, the stronger stance that this administration is taking against China? There's a significant amount of risk exposure we have here.
And then who owns Twitter? Who are its investors? I think that's a normal question for a government to ask. Mm-hmm. You know, the CCP doesn't own CBS, to my knowledge, so.
The Chinese Communist Party, no. But for Elon Musk, I know you know him, and last question here on this. Russia watcher Fiona Hill said, Putin plays the egos of big men, gives them a sense that they can play a role, but in reality, they're just direct transmitters of messages from Vladimir Putin. She just gutted Elon Musk when he was pushing pro-Russia positions. I mean, is it really that? I mean, are our adversaries using business icons to further their foreign policy?
Why, yes, that's happened before. I don't know if you've heard about President Donald Trump. I mean, people have talked about that. So, yeah, I think Elon's doing this on his own. But he's a lot of people in Silicon Valley are also mouthing the same thing. There's sort of a certain class of tech bros that are into this idea.
But you still think this transition?
Well, they have no foreign policy experience, so they have no business doing this. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't stop them, which is about everything. They're experts on everything. Because they're the richest people in the world, in case you didn't know. So I think it's slightly dangerous. I don't know, Chris.
A little bit.
We could keep talking about this. I want to keep talking about this, but I have to take a break here.